Welcome to the Radical World podcast. My name is Jose Leal, and today's guest is Douglas Rushkoff. He's not a guest. We're just having a conversation. He's still in his place. I'm in mine. And we're on opposite sides of the country, if I recall correctly. You're in New York.
Mm-hmm. Hastings on Hudson, New York. Yeah.
And I'm in Menlo Park, California. So the two extremes of the country. A real pleasure to have you here, Douglas, because I've been following a lot of what you've written over the years, the work you've been doing with Team Human, and the message that you're throwing out really resonates with the work we've been doing. So really excited to have you here and have a conversation about this stuff.
Oh, thanks.
Did you want to introduce yourself a little bit about what you've been up to and why you're famous and why people love you and why people adore to have you on their podcast?
Oh, yeah, I guess I'm a reformed theater director. I was a theater director who was getting fed up with the kind of the elitism and closed-endedness of theater in the 1980s. And just as I was really getting fed up with that, the beginnings of the internet were percolating. And I saw in the internet a new, very kind of interactive, participatory form of theater emerging, that now people were going, rather than just looking at the image on their monitor, they were going to have their hands in there. You know, to me, digital meant the digits. We're going to get our hands back onto the dashboard of reality creation together and explore and go. So I wrote a couple of the first books on this thing that was coming. And even the first one actually got canceled by Bantam because they thought the internet would be over by 1993 when the book was supposed to come out. Right. So it came out with Harper in 94. And then I came up with this kind of way of understanding the way media was moving called media virus and viral media. So that kind of put me on the map as like, oh, this guy kind of sees what's happening. And then I started to write books saying we have to make the internet and these technologies kind of pro-human, pro-culture, pro-creative, rather than, giving them to businesses just to extract value from people. And that kind of kept me going for the last 20 years, and as I wrote books like Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus and Survival of the Richest, about the kind of tech bro mindset and this addiction to exponential growth. And along the way, I also wrote a couple of books, like one that's still out there called Team Human, really explaining the alternative, that human beings are not in competition with each other. That's not even what Darwin said, that what we are the most collaborative, communicative species, and that species survival really depends on their ability to work together rather than compete against each other. So I'm out in the world really just trying to make the argument that humans deserve a place in this world, in this digital future, and that we can have and do have access to the rules and codes and programs by which we live. Don't accept them at face value. Get in there and re-engineer them in ways that serve you and other people.
Awesome. I just 2 points of connection. One, I did drama, but not in the acting side. I was stage manager, set design, all of that kind of stuff, and would have loved to stayed in that world, but it wasn't a place where I felt comfortable. Too many drama people.
I was a director.
Too much drama, as they say.
I feel terrible to say this in public, but I was a director, and part of what I wanted to get out of it was I felt that so many of the actors really were in it for psychotherapy rather than for the script, so they were working out their demons, and God bless, but it's like, I could have been a therapist and made 3 times the money. Yeah.
And the second connection is the year you published your internet book. 6 months later, I launched the first website that we did, which wound up getting acquired by a major player in Canada. So we were working in that space very much at the same time, and with different perspectives, obviously. You talk about this lack of humans in our system and lack of humanity, really, in the systems. And we look at that. Actually, it was Matt, who you met a few minutes ago, um, who coined the fiat system,
Hmm.
because it's not just fiat money, but really we've got a whole system based on control, centralized control, right? And for us, the biggest part of that is centralized control within organizations, right? This mentality that we need to control the company, that the company and the people need to be controlled, that's the only way the organization is actually going to work. We think there's a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And you decided that today we talk about open source reality,
Mm-hmm.
and we call that a radical lens, which is to be able to see that the human needs that are underneath all of this are really there, and they're the drivers behind what we desire, and that the reason that we're not satisfied, that we're not happy, is that we have a need that isn't being met, that we're not addressing, that we're not paying attention to in the world of work, but also in our society at large. And so it's that we've been talking about. So what do you see, like when you talk about open source reality? What are you talking about?
Well, I mean, let me address a bunch of the things that you were touching on. I mean,
Yeah.
sort of doing it more through example than explanation. So, if you have a sort of an open source lens on things, um, you would hear employment, say, or when you were talking about, the way people work and all that, and you'd say, well, where did jobs come from? Right? I'm born into a world where you got to get a job in order to. Well, where did they come from? Or this idea of central control and CEOs, king-like, monarch-like CEOs in corporations. Where did those come from? So someone like me, as kind of a media historian or a media theorist, I look back and I say, well, if central currency is a medium, the corporation is a medium, the employment is a medium. Where did these come from? Who invented them? Why did they invent them, and why do we still hold on to them? So if you look back, the corporation is relatively new. The corporation's based on the chartered monopoly. It was invented in the 11th and 12th century. We went millennia without these things and got a whole lot done. What were these for? So I look back and said, oh, look, when men came back from the Crusades in Europe, they had opened up all these trade routes with all these other parts of the world, and they had seen things around the world that they didn't have in Europe. And one of them that the Moors had was called the bazaar. The bazaar was this marketplace where people brought their stuff and traded laterally. So to the peasants of Europe, who only knew how to grow food and deliver it to the Lord, the idea of trading with each other at a market was totally new. So they built the marketplace. They got stuff from far away and they made stuff at home. They created value. They grew chickens. They made shoes. They milled flour. They had all this stuff. They brought it to the market and they traded it with each other. And if they didn't want to barter, they created these little, almost poker chip like coins that were issued in the morning. They expired at the end of the day, but you could use them to sort of little placeholder IOUs to get all the trade going. People got rich. Women were taller in medieval England, the marketplace women, than they were at any time until the 1980s. They were working 3 days a week. They were starting to have fun. They were getting wealthy. They built cathedrals. We think the cathedrals were the Vatican wrote a check. No, it was local wealth from the bottom up. But the problem was, as the people got wealthy and created the new middle class, the aristocracy got poor. So they created two things to prevent the rise of the middle class. One of them was the chartered monopoly, which said, you're not allowed to make shoes anymore. The only one who's allowed to make shoes is let's say I'll let you do it, or I'll let Matt do it. Matt's the official chartered monopoly of shoes, His Majesty's Royal Shoe Company, and Matt is going to own it. So
He'll
if
be
you,
really happy to hear that.
yeah, and if you used to be a shoemaker now, Jose, you'd have to go work as an employee for Matt. So now, if you were a cobbler, instead of making shoes and selling the value you created, now you worked by the hour for Matt. This is the same moment that they put the clock on the tower in the medieval village to make it look like now you have a technology, it's there. You're born into a world with a clock on the tower, and time is money, and that's how it works. And now, passed down to us, this punch the clock reality, we all think, well, you need to have a job in order to make money, in order to do something. It's like, no, this is from medieval Europe. Same with central currency. They made all those little local poker chip monies illegal, and now you had to borrow money from the central treasury at interest, which means you also have to pay back the interest, which means your economy has to grow, which means now we're stuck with people like Biden and Kamala saying, oh, well, the GDP is going to grow by 2 or 3% this year. Why does the GDP have to grow? Because in the 11th and 12th century, these dudes invented a money system, a monopoly money system that requires growth in order to stand still. So the open source reality is being able to look at the rules and systems we take for granted. The idea that this 20th century idea that any movement or company has some middle-aged white guy at the top leading us, ends justifies the means to the goal. Who needs a CEO? I mean, till recently, that's why we had 2 old white men were the only ones believably running for president, because it's like, oh, we need one of those. But no, we can, or why can't we have a committee of 3 presidents? What would that look like instead of one person bearing all this weight? So it's all up for grabs.
What if we don't have that weight at all, and we allow things to come from the bottom up rather than from the top down? Right? In an organization, that's, I've done 6 startups. Mm-hmm. When you're in startup mode, everybody's doing everything, right? There's hardly a hierarchy in a small organization.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, it's like,
point. It works to a point. I mean, I love this kind of holocratic organizations. I'm an anarchist. Look at the 12-step program. 12-step program is anarchy, right? All these little local things, but they've got one book. But what binds a holocratic bottom-up organization together are shared values. You've got to really know, what is it that we are working towards? How are we trying to make the world better? What are those? If you don't have those, then you do need some dude or dudette telling you what to do.
But we hire people whose only purpose is to make money, right? Yeah. And so they don't have a purpose other than that, right?
Exactly. And then the company suffers, because one of the other topics one of the things I suggested as the topic, I wrote a book for business called Get Back in the Box, and I meant it half facetiously, because the subtitle of the book is Why Being Good at What You Do is Great for Business. Because there's this sort of that Jack Welch General Electric realization when he found out, oh, I make more money lending someone money to buy a washing machine than I do making a washing machine. So he said all businesses should sell off their competencies and basically become spreadsheets with outsourced competencies. And you ended up with all these companies that had nobody in the company that knew the actual business they were in. They treated them generically. And no. So when you build a company, my organizational model is a mandala, where at the center of the mandala are the people who love the thing the most. If it's a hotel business, people who love hotel sheets and carpet and cleaning and the nerds of the business go in the middle, and everybody else in the company are serving the nerds at the center of the culture. And when you have one of those cultures, you not only get all the great innovation, but the rest of the world understands that that's the place. That's the place where they really understand bikes or TVs or whatever the product is.
They love doing what they're doing. They're doing it for the sake of what they're doing, not simply because it's going to be
not for the extrinsic rewards of money. Just the whole word, even that when you work, you get compensated for the work. I don't want to be compensated for the work. I want to maybe be rewarded for the success, that'd be fine. But no, I want intrinsic rewards. I want, when I'm successful, I want to get to move closer and closer to the middle of the company with the other nerds.
and the word employee, right? I don't want to be employed like a tool, that the tool that we are when we're employees, right? I mean,
Right.
we're simply being used as a tool, right?
We are, but that's again, it's legacy, and we could blame the tech bros for it, because they want as few human beings in a
No.
company as possible. They are, you're not going to scale if you have employees. We got to replace them with programs and get rid of them. Even Uber, it's like Uber is an autonomous vehicle company on
Waiting,
its way, right?
waiting.
Waiting to get there, right? But that again comes from the Middle Ages, where the human beings needed to be taken out of the equation. That was the whole point. When you had a proto factory floor in medieval times, or think about Matt's shoe company. Does Matt want skilled shoemakers at his shoe company? No, he doesn't, because they're going to want money. They're going to have leverage. What he wants is to go to the Home Depot parking lot and get the undocumented alien and bring them in, train them in 10 minutes how to do one little piece of the labor, and then pass the shoe on to the next person, so that he can train them quickly and fire them and replace them if they want more money. So the whole point of industry has been to remove human beings from the equation, to remove the humanity, and
Well,
we
certainly
still
the
look at it
humanity,
that way. Yeah.
and not only the humanity in the sense that we as humans, the second we walk in that door, I was VP of that organization that acquired me, and I felt it. Even though I was in management, I would walk in the door and it was like, I've just lost myself, right? I've lost myself to whatever it is that's going on in here that has nothing to do with humanity,
Yeah.
right?
I always thought about that when I would go, and I know they make revolving doors for real reasons, because it helps keep the cool air in or the cold air out or whatever. But the whole idea that to enter work, you actually pass through a gear. It's like, welcome to the machine, right?
Right. It's I never thought of that, but it's very much a conditioning thing. Thank you for taking the right paces, going the right direction, because you go the other way, you can't. We won't allow you to go that
Yeah.
direction. You got
And
to.
it's interesting, when you talk about bottom up organization, I think about like the difference between like a European traffic circle and an American traffic light.
Right.
A traffic circles really work. There's a couple of simple rules you have to know. They go counterclockwise, you go to the right, so you go to the right and you yield right of way to the people who are already in the traffic circle. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
And once you know that, they can do really complex things. In America, we can't do that. It requires like cooperation and skill and thought or something. You're going to just have a red or green light. You sit in front of a thing, right? And wait. There might be nobody there, but now you got to sit. It's command and control, because we don't trust this sort
We
of
don't trust
bottom
each other.
up organismic organization to happen.
And traffic circles actually produce less accidents, believe it or
Yeah.
not, right? And there's another aspect. I love that you brought that one up, because I use that one all the time. When you get into a traffic circle or about to, the first thing you do is you look at people's faces. Are they paying attention to me? Do they know I'm here? Where are they? Are they coming in? Are they going out? What's going on? You have to be in the moment and present
Right.
with what's happening. You're at a light that people run red lights because you don't have to be engaged,
Right.
right? It's just, oh, I wasn't paying attention to the light because I can just keep going, right?
Right.
I
But
don't
that's the
have to
thing.
look anybody in the face.
But then look at anybody's experience of life. It's like, do you go to work in order to dig in and be there? Or do you take a Valium before you even arrive so that you can zone out as much as possible? And it's the same with driving or anything that people are doing. If you're not into what you're doing, then you're going to be attempting to anesthetize yourself and not participate. So if you're doing that, then you have to look at, well, am I in the right job? Am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right relationship? Am I living in the right town? How can you maximize the number of times during the day that you try to soak up what's happening rather than try to protect yourself from it?
Absolutely. One of the people that you've spoken to, I guess in the last year or so, it was Nathan Schneider. And he's part of the co-op community. We're part of the co-op community, and one of the things that we've explored is where are co-ops a good place to start, and taking co-ops towards this new future. Part of the issue that we see is that, as wonderful as co-ops are, and they do have, as you pointed out, about the 7-step, that we have this need for a more democratic organization. But part of that is they're still in the, we have to fight the system, and we're still workers. We're worker owned. Like, it's like we really don't run a company. We're just workers who happen to have a company. They don't allow themselves the agency to say, this is ours. This is as good or better than what they've got. It's almost as if it's a diminutive version of a real company.
Yeah, I mean, right now it only works in certain instances, where I've seen, worker cooperatives kind of work best is where there's like a boomer owner CEO who wants to leave the business. Their kids don't want it. So then the workers buy it, but they've been there a while. They're familiar with it and they kind of love it. And they have some dedication to being there. When you have it's harder with, say, a grocery store like Publix, which is kind of a co-op. But if you're not thinking you're going to work, I'm going to work there a year or two and then leave. I don't want to worry about governance and all that stuff. So then you kind of need co-op networks of cooperatives. So you can leave one company in the network and move to another one, be more of a Mondragon style thing, because cooperatives must cooperate with each other, and you create a kind of new rhizomatic network of companies that you can move across, at least to accommodate today's rapid turnover of people. But yeah, I mean, worker owned business. This is what the Pope came up with when he was asked, back in whenever that was, to comment on Marx. He's like, what is the church? What's the church's opinion on Marxism? And they basically came back with distributism. They had two main principles. One, workers should own the means of production. They should own the factories in which they work. They should own the tools that they're using. And two was this notion of subsidiarity, that no business should be bigger than it needs to be in order to do what it needs to do. So if you have Joe's Pizzeria and it's serving its town, and the next town wants a pizzeria, you don't expand Joe's to the next town. You help Mary open up her pizzeria there, your network. So maybe you'll buy your cheese together to reduce the price, or you'll have workers be able to go back and forth a little bit so you can help each other out, because it's better for Joe. Joe loves making pizza. Joe doesn't want to be a manager of a pizza chain. He wants to be a pizza maker and smell the stuff and see his happy customers. It's very, very different.
But in today's world, Joe's dream is to become the CEO and not have to be with the little people, not have to be dealing with the operations. That's sort of the dream.
And that's contagious. That's all the way up and all the way down. I do this talk when I get invited to a business school. I started to do this maybe 10 years ago. I start my conversation. I say, would anybody in this room be satisfied making $50 million? No one raises their hand. And I said, well, the object of this talk for me is to convince you that having $50 million as your personal wealth goal will lead to a more fun, more probable, and more beneficial company. But most of them, they want to earn $1 billion. They want to be Zuck. They want to be Musk. The idea of only $50 million is like they failed. Yeah.
And in the startup world, I'm in the middle of it, right? Menlo Park here. I could throw a stone at Facebook, right? We're so embedded in this view of the world, this lens that everything needs to be about.
It's
competing and growing and becoming disengaged from work.
I know. It's ironic to me, because for me, the internet was about this kind of open source disruption, we can reprogram reality the way we want. And these hackers, what they do is and they're not real hackers, but these disruptors, they're happy to disrupt a vertical. I'm going to disrupt books. I'm going to disrupt hotels. I'm going to disrupt taxis. But no one wants to disrupt the underlying landscape of venture capital. It's like the first thing they do is they run to daddy at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. Oh, make my IPO happen so I can have a ticker on the NASDAQ stock exchange. It's like, that's reactionary. That's conservative. That's not revolutionary. That's conformist, right? Disrupt the underlying system. You look at someone like Musk, that's not, if you want to reinvent transportation, you don't electrify cars. You think, how do we move people, right? You want to reinvent the economy. You don't just do crypto, which is central currency on steroids, right? Which is the conversion of matter into bits, which is what we've just burned the planet to promote a coin. What you do is you think about, well, what would a distributed economic system actually look like?
When one of the folks that we work with, and I've seen him posting some things here on the left, is Michael Linton. I don't know if you.
I know Michael well. Yeah, from back in the day.
Back in the day,
we met in the Internet Society conference with run by who was it? Christine Maxwell, I think, in the late '90s. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael's part of our broader community.
He's one of the smartest humans walking.
Oh, don't say that. He already has a swollen head.
Yeah, I know, but these guys do, because they are. That's the problem. There's a few. Alan Kay, you talk to one of these guys and they're oh, fuck, they know everything.
There are a lot of brilliant folks doing a lot of good work. The question that I've got and is less about where Michael's going with the issue of how do we bring new currencies and new ways of doing it, because that's all absolutely necessary. We need to figure out how to do all of that. But before we do that, right, it's sort of the conversation that Schmachtenberger has started to realize, because all the technical solutions that everybody's talking about are necessary. We know that's necessary. The other thing's necessary. We all know that. But none of them are going to happen from within the current system. They're going to have to emerge from somewhere else. In other words, it has to be a newborn way of doing things that ends up growing to displace, hopefully, the current system, but not that the existing system is actually going to be able to adopt these new things from the top down. It's like saying to the CEO, give up being a CEO, give it all to your people. Not too many CEOs are going to do that. Not too many investors are going to do that. Not too many of anything's going to do that, right?
Yeah, but I would maybe think of it like this. There's a lot of people who would be very threatened by the idea of dismantling the current systems in order to have something else happen. So I think we might want to model ourselves more on, say, mycelia, right? How do we grow on and metabolize the existing system in order for it to have a fundamental transformation? So nobody realizes we're like taking it apart. We're not breaking it. We're metabolizing it. And then when you think about how do mushrooms metabolize, how does that work? It's not really through, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. It's through something else, and, when I look at issues like, climate change or economics and all, I start thinking, and it gets scary to people, but I start to think that our last best hope is magic. And when I say magic, I mean the magic of, actually transforming how we think. Our experience of reality shifts to the point where the 300 people in the business school I'm talking to don't need to make $1 billion. They're thinking, no, I'd like to make $50 million, like Rushkoff said. That's probably enough. I'm one of the big things I've been asking people to do is, when you need something, consider borrowing it from your neighbor. I've started to do this talk called Borrow a Drill. Like if you got to hang a picture, you don't have a drill, normally you go to Home Depot, get a minimum viable product drill and bring it back. And then you're going to use it once and leave it in the garage and it's never going to work again. Why are we so afraid to knock on Bob's door and say, Bob, can I borrow your drill? It's because then we're going to be in relationship with his neighbor. Then he might want something from you. Then he might want to come over to your barbecue party you have the next weekend. And the nightmare scenario is that you end up friends with the people on your block, sharing stuff. You have one lawnmower on the block rather than 7 that you all share. Now, invariably, someone gets up at the end of that talk and says, well, yeah, if you only have one lawnmower on the block that everybody's sharing, what happens to the people who work in the lawnmower company? What happens to their jobs? Well, maybe that's work that doesn't need to be done. They can start working on something else, like comforting people or teaching kids math or walking dogs or working less. All of these possibilities open once we re-find each other.
Right. And I like to think of it as interdependence. When you tell your story about the drill, I like to tell the story of my friend George, who would always say, whenever I move into a neighborhood, I go around to all my neighbors and ask them for sugar. And I don't do it because I need sugar, because I just got sugar from the previous neighbor, but I do it because I want to owe them something. Right.
That's why we bring something when someone moves into the neighborhood and you bring them a plate of brownies, right?
Exactly.
You're not bringing it because they need their kids to be climbing the walls all night, the first night in their new home when they're already afraid to go to sleep, right? No, you bring them brownies so that they have to bring you back the plate, hopefully with something that they put on it. You're weaving them into the fabric of interdependency, of obligation.
Right. And it's my sense that that's not just a good idea, that's actually how humans work. That it isn't an option that we should be doing this because it's a nice way to go about living.
No.
But that we fundamentally broke society when we stopped doing that.
Right. It's not just how human society works. It's how life works. It's how the planet maintains its temperature balance. It's a series of interdependencies. Yeah.
It's homeostasis within a communal relationship, right?
Right.
Give and take and give and take. And we find that balance. If you don't give enough and you take too much, that's not good, and vice versa, right?
But the interesting thing is, in communities, when I talk to people about this, the reluctance is less about giving than about getting. People are afraid to owe. That's the thing. So I'm asking people to have courage to ask for help, to ask for someone to help, and then and that's what triggers the bottom up accumulation of interdependencies.
Absolutely. And Michael says relationships are sticky. Good and bad, right? Like we can get messed up in relationships and we can really thrive.
Right. Well, you could get codependent instead of interdependent, right?
Exactly.
I mean, to use the 70s cycling go, but yeah.
So it sounds like we're on the same page as to where we go from here, where we are going from here. I don't think it's an option or a question as much as it's what's emerging. And I think people like you are really great years beforehand to see what's emerging before it really starts to stick its head out of the ground very high. What are you seeing? What you talk to people all around the world, you're talking about this and thinking about this. What are you seeing as what's emerging in these organizations and these new ways of collaborating, this new economy, this new world of media? What's happening?
I'm not seeing it in business as much. I am seeing it in smaller businesses. I am seeing, like I know a woman who is selling sheepskin and sheep wool that's grown on a farm on one side of where she lives, and she has these women who live in a house on the other side who are weaving the stuff, and these other people over there who are so I'm seeing communities create almost kibbutz like businesses. They're not like all necessarily living together on a kibbutz, but sort of these local multi-factored businesses. It would be, the closest thing would be, Noam Chomsky used to talk about this, anarcho-syndicalism, these sort of cottage industries networked together that are creating value to put out things together. I'm seeing that again, very, very bottom up, more than I'm seeing, Cisco has just become holocratic, and I'm not
Right.
I'm not
That's
seeing
not
that so
gonna.
much. The larger companies, even when they have a good CEO who wants to do that, usually they're shareholders, or they'll be activist shareholders that prevent the company from moving in a long-term value creation direction. It's really hard.
So we're working with co-ops that are small businesses, like you've described, that are doing the type of work that the community needs. Right? They're not doing it because there's like this opportunity to go big. They're doing it because it's something they enjoy doing, taking care of people, building things, cleaning homes, whatever it is.
Meeting needs is like
Meeting the
it's a
needs,
novel concept. Yeah.
right? But many of those needs are being met by non-community players. So you talk about Uber, right? Like, used to be, my dad was a cab driver when he was young, back in Portugal. He lived in the community. He served the community. He drove the community around. That was his thing. He loved it. He got to meet everybody. He was a people person.
Yeah.
Absolutely freaking loved it. So much so he wasn't all home all that long, all that much. But now you've got a guy that works as a gig worker, and let's assume that, except for the costs, he gets to keep 50% of the markup, right?
Right.
And that the other 50 goes over to Uber. That's no longer in our community.
No, we've taken a medium whose purpose, I thought, was to disintermediate things, and we've used it to reintermediate relationships and to re-centralize them. The thing that people don't realize, or some people do now, is something like Uber is not a complicated piece of technology. Uber is GPS, a dating app, and a cash register. You put them together, you've got Uber. Anyone can write Uber. So in Austin, there's an alternative to Uber that's quite competitive. There's one in New York. I don't know how well it's doing now, but it's a very simple choice. You don't even need the kind of global monopoly of a thing. If you know, I'm going to be going to Chicago, what's their local taxi app? And this is the one that takes 5% from the people instead of 50%, or this is the one that the drivers own. This is the co-op, or the driver owned app that your percent of how much you own is based on how much you've driven. And you got a simple blockchain technology for that. And it's all,
and
turnkey.
We're actually talking to a group of folks that are doing that here in Northern California, trying to set up a driver's co-op. In California, and
right. The monopolies are mean. The monopolies, you take like Seamless and Grubhub and all that. If you start using a local delivery app for your restaurant, you're going to be banned from ours, and we're going to keep you off the thing. If you have a second app running in your car and Uber finds out that they're going to ban you and fine you, and it's scary. Right. It's scary. That's
because
what you need the other people.
Monopolies want monopoly.
They love it. That's the rule. That's good in business school now. They call it what? Defensible outcomes, which means how to become a monopoly, how to have that one-way ratchet towards enshittification.
Right. The blue ocean strategy. Find yourself a place where you're a monopoly, because that's what you can do. I'm having a great time. Are you okay for another few minutes? Because I want to ask a couple of more questions.
Yeah.
I'll keep it short. So you said you're seeing this in small community plays, but you're not seeing it in a big scale. Do you think that small communities still have what it would take to actually influence the mainstream markets? Meaning, like, the mom and pop shoe store and pizza place and so on and so forth, in local communities banding together through these collaborative ways that you described, which I wholly agree with, and it's the work that we're doing, do you think that that still has the potential of influencing, not directly fighting, but influencing over time the way that our communities operate?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's going to happen one way or the other, right? We're either going to shift that way because it works better, or we're going to shift that way because we have to, because there's nothing else. You know, the companies that employ us would prefer we not exist anyway, right? They're working hard to have Claude or Chat GPT or something replace us anyway, or a robot or anything. So sadly, and I think Michael's suggesting this too, is that
Yeah.
the only likely way is through more pain. But sometimes people have shift. I'm thinking about, individual mind shifts that we know, like how Lyndon Johnson shifted to civil rights, even though it started cynically, or Anwar Sadat shifted to peace in the Middle East after people have sudden mind shift. And I'm just hoping, I'm a hope fiend, that we could do that on a collective, on a more global level, that we'll just go, oh, this is fucking dumb. Let's just take care of each other. Let's move towards a more nurturing society. And who knows, as we move towards the possibility of a female archetype in the presidency, we could start to understand, nurture over aggression and some of these other more connected ways. We could move from needing to be the person singing the melody to being all resonant together, learning as it's so simple. I mean, I spoke at a college in South Dakota, and they're all farm kids there, and they all understood about low impact agriculture, and about not turning the soil and doing, slits and things instead. They all are understanding permaculture and how microclimates work, that if you change the way you're dealing with the soil and the water in a small area, you'll start to get rain on your area. I mean, it's like, how the heck did that work? You talk to any indigenous person, they're like, well, duh. What did you think? That you need to do geoengineering on the whole planet to make a difference? Of course it changes. So as people have those realizations, combined with as people are, alcoholics have to hit bottom usually, and we may be hitting bottom. We may finally be there. And then it means we start doing the 12 steps. Realize you're part of something greater than that, make amends, it's pretty straightforward. What we get to do from the minute we realize we're in this together.
Not only are we in this together, the sense that we're not in this together is a fallacy. It's
right.
We've always been in this together. It's not as if it's an option. It's just that we've been told that we're not, and
right.
we believed it. And so we've gone around thinking that I'm by myself. Why is everybody freaking depressed? Why is everybody running around on drugs?
Yep.
Because they think they're alone.
And people have looked, there have been so many different ways of trying to say it. McLuhan always talked about figure and ground, that people are transfixed by the figure and they're not aware of the ground, which means like you're looking at the thing on the TV rather than the landscape in which we live, the subject, the nouns, that always get, even climate change or global warming or the thing, they're these singular fixed things. I mean, the UN development goals, bless them, they're wonderful. But, as my friend Nora Bateson says, just imagine a mother nursing her baby and think about everything that's required for that to happen in a healthy way. And you've got your 12 distinct metric development goals are all built in, that we, bless his heart. Jesus kind of said it, I'm a Jew and I'm granular, right? And the Jews were writing Talmud and all these laws. You're like, okay, if the cow goes through the fence, but you haven't maintained it, are you responsible? Is the neighbor responsible? Ever more granularity to figure out how do we live ethically together. And Jesus was like, that's really nice, but you may be getting lost in the details. You might just try to, what
Feel
feels
this.
right here, you know, and maybe this may just help a little bit too. And I think we need, that's why I'm talking about sort of, you know, mycelial networks over digital networks. That something else is transmitted organically from person to person. This ability to experience compassion really opens the door to uh, uh, being able to be together. If you don't have an experience of compassion, you really won't know how to do it.
And I don't think you can experience compassion if there is no interdependence.
Well, right, because then it's pity or something else. Yeah,
Right?
they are
Because
part of you. We're in the field together. You know, I don't want to get too new agey, but we're all part of the same thing. You know,
right. Wow. I know you had to sort of stop around now, and I could talk to you for another hour. You mentioned,
maybe we'll do it again.
yeah, Nora. You mentioned Nora. I'd love to go on Team Human if you want to have that conversation there. Um, um, you mentioned Nora. I met her last year, and we had a couple-hour conversation, which was awesome because I'd often misunderstood where she was coming from, and the way that she speaks is somewhat flowery sometimes for me.
Mm.
But it was a great experience. So I really
She's a
appreciate it.
poet. She's a
She's
poet
a
in
poet.
addition
She's a
to a
real
writer.
poet.
So
And her
yeah,
last book was really poetry more
yeah.
than anything else. Um, Douglas, a real awesome pleasure. And
Oh, it's
yeah,
great to
we'll
be
do
with
this
you. It's
one
funny.
more
Yeah, I
time.
was glad because I saw it was sort of a businessy thing, and I thought, oh no, it's going to be one of those. But the odd thing is, it's funny. I used to get all these business talks, you know, back in the day, back when businesses and the internet, when they were kind of hopeful about doing something with humanity, and I found that in the last, partly since COVID, but really the last 3 or 4 years, companies are not hiring me to speak nearly as much because really what they're doing is kind of intentionally putting the blinders on. They kind of don't want to hear the message of just get really good at what you do, mine in for the passion, find the other humans, restore the culture of your company. There, it's and in some ways I'm looking at that as an optimistic sign that it's like, oh, they've kind of given up. They're going to wither on the vine now.
Yeah.
And it's up to, you know, and even a speaking gig, a $10,000 talk or whatever is an artifact of the bad way of doing things.
Right.
Any company that's got $10,000 or $20,000 to throw around
I'm
probably
sorry to say
doesn't
you might
deserve
be
us.
Douglas, but still, you're right.
Right. Exactly. It's like, well, it's kind of like, yeah, it's based on it's exploiting an existing distortion
Exactly.
rather than getting into the community, you know, getting $500 for an evening of advice and feeling good about your life.
And maybe getting fed a little bit of food
Of
and
food and comfort and someone pat you on the back.
exactly.
Yeah. Remember? Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome.
You
Absolutely
too.
awesome. Thank you so much, Douglas. I'm
Thank you.
going
Thank you
to,
everyone for being there.
yeah, thank you. And Michael and Hans and everyone else who sent us some messages. We're having such a great conversation. I didn't want to get too distracted and involve that change in the topic. I want to introduce that we're going to have Frank Eggink coming next week. Frank is involved in supporting new organizations and teams towards the journey of self-organization and agility. And I know of Frank. We've connected a few times, but we've never actually had the chance to spend a good time as we have now with Douglas. So I'm looking forward to that. Douglas, a real
Thank you.
pleasure, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, definitely.
Cheers.
Take care.